The first bullet whistled past her ear, so close she felt the heat of it singe the air. The second kicked up a spray of dirt and rock right at her heels, a violent punctuation mark to the thundering hoofbeats behind her. Hannah Sawyer's lungs were on fire. Her bare feet were shredded, bleeding from the sharp stones and broken twigs of the unforgiving prairie. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. "You can't outrun us, woman!" A man's voice roared, rough as gravel and twice as mean. "Ain't nowhere to hide out here." He was right. The endless prairie stretched out under a bruised evening sky, the tall grass swaying like a dead ocean. The nearest tree line was a dark smudge on the horizon, half a mile away at least. An impossible distance. Her strength was gone. 3 years of captivity had whittled her down, leaving her bones too close to her skin, her spirit a flickering candle in a hurricane. But what drove her forward wasn't strength. It was rage. The kind of rage that burns cold and quiet. The kind that sustains you when everything else has turned to ash. In her trembling hand, she clutched a folded piece of paper. It was sweat-stained, tear-smudged, and her only hope of salvation. Or at least her only hope for vengeance. The riders were closing in. 20 yards, then 10. She knew she wasn't going to make it, but they weren't going to get what they wanted. With her last ounce of will, Hannah stumbled behind a small rocky outcropping, barely big enough to shield her for a moment. She unfolded the paper. It was a crude map, the ink blurred, but the lines were burned into her memory. A red line like a bleeding wound snaked across familiar land, cutting right through Redemption Creek, right through their home, right through Maxwell's pastures. It was the secret route the railroad men had planned, the route that ran directly over the gold they'd discovered, the secret she'd protected for 3 long years. She fumbled in her pocket for the match she'd stolen. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. The hoofbeats were almost on top of her. She struck the match against the rock, the tiny flare of light a defiant star in the growing dusk. She held the small flame to the corner of the map. The paper caught instantly. Orange fingers crawled across the secret, consuming it. The fire licked at her fingertips, but she held on, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost holy. She held on until the last corner turned to black ash and scattered into the wind. A rough hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back with brutal force. She didn't scream. She learned a long, long time ago that screaming only gave them satisfaction. "You stupid bitch," a voice hissed in her ear, the man's breath hot and sour. "You think burning it changes anything? The plans are already in motion." Hannah turned her face to her captor, a man with eyes like empty wells and a cruel twist to his lips. "I memorized every inch," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Every stream, every ridge. The map is up here now." She tapped her temple with a dirt-streaked finger. The back of his hand cracked across her face, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The taste of blood filled her mouth, warm and metallic. She just stared up at him, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Throw her in with the others," the man commanded, his voice shaking with fury. "Mr. Sullivan will decide what to do with her in the morning." Rough hands shoved her into a burlap sack. The smell of earth and decay filled her nostrils, a scent she had come to know all too well. As they tied it shut, plunging her into suffocating darkness, Hannah's lips formed silent words. A prayer, a promise, and a curse. The darkness consumed her, but somewhere in the depths of her broken mind, a face appeared. William's face, her son, her reason for enduring the unendurable. "I'm coming home," she thought, as consciousness finally slipped away. "I'm finally coming home." Maxwell Sawyer stood at the edge of his property, his gaze fixed on the place where the sun was bleeding into the western hills. His weathered hands rested on a fence post, the calluses built from 13 years of working this land, 13 years of wrestling a living from the stubborn soil. He'd done it alone. Well, not entirely alone, not at first, but for the past 3 years, solitude had been his only faithful companion, a bitter and silent friend. The evening air carried the scent of coming rain, and somewhere in the distance, a lone owl hooted at the approaching night. Maxwell should have been heading back to the house, getting the lamps lit, but something kept him rooted to the spot. A feeling, a cold, prickling unease at the back of his neck. His gaze drifted toward the dusty road that led to Redemption Creek, the small town 5 miles east. He rarely went there anymore. The townsfolk had their opinions about Maxwell Sawyer, the quiet rancher who'd fought for the Union, only to come back a different man. The brooding husband whose wife had vanished into thin air 3 years ago, leaving him to bury their only son all by himself. Some of them pitied him. Others whispered. They whispered that maybe Hannah had simply had enough. Enough of his brooding silence, enough of the nightmares from the war that still woke him, screaming some nights. They whispered she'd run off with another man, abandoning her sick child without a backward glance. Maxwell knew better. Hannah would never have left William, not willingly. She loved that boy more than she loved the sunrise. As the light began to fade, he spotted something on the horizon, a dark shape against the purpling sky. He squinted, his eyes sharp from years of scanning for predators and weather. A wagon, maybe, but it was motionless, sitting dead still in the middle of the road, as if it had been abandoned. Curiosity, that old dangerous friend, pulled him forward. He crossed the field with long, determined strides, one hand instinctively moving to rest on the butt of the revolver at his hip, a habit from darker days that he'd never managed to break. The closer he got, the stranger it seemed. The wagon stood empty. No horse in sight, no driver. It wasn't a local wagon either. Maxwell knew every vehicle in Redemption Creek. This one was unmarked, its wood weathered by travel, not by the local climate. It was foreign. Wrong. In the back, 2 large burlap sacks lay slumped and still. They were bound with thick rope, their shapes irregular and unsettlingly human. Maxwell's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. He'd seen sights like this during the war, the grim aftermath of skirmishes, bodies collected for mass burial. But this was his land, his home. Death had no business here, not anymore. He'd left death back on the battlefields of Pennsylvania. Then a sound broke the silence. It was so faint he almost missed it. A whisper, dry as autumn leaves, rustling on the wind. "Burn it all!" Maxwell froze. His breath caught in his throat. The voice? It had come from one of the sacks. He drew the knife from the sheath on his belt, the blade glinting in the last light of day. His hands were steady, a surgeon's calm settling over him. He moved to the larger of the 2 sacks, the one the voice seemed to have come from. He began to slice through the thick rope, each cut releasing a puff of dust into the cooling air. What would he find? A trap? An ambush? He didn't care. That voice, however faint, had been a woman's. The burlap fell away. It revealed a shape so broken and frail that at first Maxwell didn't recognize what he was seeing. A tangle of matted hair, limbs like kindling sticks, skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Then the head lifted, and eyes he knew better than his own reflection stared back at him. Hannah. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer, a ghost of a word. Her skin was scorched by the sun, her once vibrant auburn hair now a dull, tangled mess. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. But the strangest thing was the scars. Circling both of her wrists were a series of puckered, pinkish scars shaped like fish hooks. "Hannah," he said again, this time reaching for her, his hands trembling. "My God, Hannah." She flinched at his touch, her eyes wide and feral, like a cornered animal. But she didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze moved past him, frantically scanning the horizon. She was still looking for danger. "You're safe," Maxwell whispered, though the words felt hollow and useless. How could she be safe when she'd returned like this? Half dead, wrapped in burlap like a sack of unwanted grain. "You're home now." He lifted her from the wagon, shocked by how little she weighed. It was like holding a bird with hollow bones. She didn't resist, but she didn't help either. Her body was limp in his arms, a dead weight of trauma and exhaustion. As he turned toward the house, a dark silhouette against the last of the light, her head lolled against his chest. She whispered again, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "They're still under the water." Maxwell didn't understand. He had no idea what she was talking about, but he held her tighter and walked toward the house that had stood empty of joy for 3 long, silent years. He carried her home, but he had a sickening feeling that he hadn't brought back the same woman who had left. The house welcomed them with familiar creaks and groans, as though it too recognized the return of its mistress after a long, painful absence. Maxwell carried Hannah straight to their bedroom, a room he'd kept untouched since the day she disappeared. It was preserved like a shrine to his grief, her clothes still in the wardrobe, her brush still on the dresser. He laid her gently on the bed, half afraid she might break under any sudden movement. "I'll get water," he said, his voice sounding strange and loud in the quiet room. "And food. You need to eat." Hannah's eyes followed him, but she made no response. The emptiness in her gaze frightened him more than her physical state. It was as if something vital had been carved out of her, leaving behind only a hollow vessel. In the kitchen, Maxwell's hands shook as he pumped water into a basin. 3 years. For 3 long years, he'd swung between believing her dead and a worse, unspoken fear. 3 years of enduring the pitying glances of his neighbors, of waking in the dead of night and reaching for someone who wasn't there. And now she was back. A miracle. But the woman in that bed was a ghost wearing Hannah's face. What had they done to her? What horrors had she seen? When he returned, she had managed to sit up, her back pressed against the headboard, her knees drawn to her chest like a frightened child. He approached slowly, setting the water basin on the nightstand. "I'm going to clean your wounds," he said, his voice gentle, showing her the clean cloth in his hand. "Is that all right?" Hannah didn't answer, but she extended one arm. The strange hook-shaped scars circled her wrist like some macabre bracelet. The flesh was puckered and angry. Maxwell dipped the cloth in the cool water and began to gently wash away the layers of dirt and grime, moving with the same gentle precision he'd once used to tend to William during his fevers. William. How was he going to tell her? The thought was a stone in his throat. How do you tell a mother who has just returned from hell that her son is gone? That she wasn't there to hold his hand as the fever took him? As he cleaned her face, revealing the familiar constellation of freckles he'd once memorized with his fingertips, Hannah finally spoke again. Her voice was a dry croak, but the words were clear. "Don't trust anyone with a gold watch." Maxwell paused, the cloth suspended midair. "What?" "The gold watch," she repeated, her voice a little stronger now, a flicker of something hard and dangerous in her eyes. "It marks them, marks their loyalty." He resumed his work, his mind reeling. Was this a delusion brought on by her trauma? Or did her words hold a meaning he couldn't yet grasp? He had to know. "Sheriff Emerson wears a gold watch," he said carefully, testing her reaction. Something flickered in Hannah's eyes. Recognition. Fear. He couldn't tell which. But she said nothing more, retreating back into that terrifying silence. Later, after he'd helped her eat a small portion of broth, which was all her stomach could handle, Maxwell sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her drift into a fitful, troubled sleep. In the soft lamplight, with her eyes closed, she almost looked like the woman he remembered. The woman who'd planted sunflowers along the fence, who'd sung to William during thunderstorms, who'd loved this land as fiercely as she loved her family. But then she began to whimper in her sleep, her hands clawed at invisible restraints, her body twitching. He knew then that the Hannah who had returned to him carried shadows he might never fully understand. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Maxwell didn't move from his vigil. He was terrified that if he closed his eyes, she might disappear again, a beautiful, tragic dream that would evaporate with the morning dew. He stayed there all night, watching her, guarding her, and with every hour that passed, a cold, hard certainty grew in his gut. This wasn't over. Her return wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning, and it was going to end in blood. News in a place like Redemption Creek travels faster than a prairie fire. By mid-morning, a steady stream of curious visitors found reasons to ride past the Sawyer Ranch, their horses slowing, their necks craning, all hoping for a glimpse of the woman who had returned from the dead. None of them dared to approach the house directly. Maxwell's reputation for wanting his privacy was well established, but their presence hung in the air, a constant, buzzing reminder that their private miracle was now public speculation. Hannah spent the morning by the window, staring out at the small family cemetery on the hill. A tiny, weathered headstone marked the resting place of their son. She hadn't asked about William yet, and Maxwell, the coward he was, hadn't found the courage to tell her. Each time he opened his mouth to speak the terrible words, his throat closed around them. The sound of hoofbeats approaching pulled him from his thoughts. A single rider, coming up the main path without hesitation. Maxwell's hand went to his hip. It was Sheriff Victor Emerson. "Stay here," Maxwell told Hannah, though she showed no intention of moving from the window. "I'll handle this." He stepped onto the porch just as Emerson dismounted. The sheriff was a tall man with the rigid posture of his military days. He'd exchanged his Union uniform for a tin star, but the air of authority he carried was unchanged. And glinting in the morning light, a gold watch chain was draped across his vest. "Morning, Maxwell," Emerson called out, removing his hat. "Heard some interesting news in town." Maxwell descended the steps, deliberately positioning himself between the sheriff and the house. "Word travels fast." "Small towns," Emerson agreed, a tight smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "They're saying Hannah's back. That true?" "She is." The sheriff's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Maxwell saw something shift in his gaze. A flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Surprise? No, it was something else. Something harder. "Well, that's a miracle, isn't it?" Emerson said, his voice smooth as polished wood. "After all this time, how'd she find her way home?" "She didn't. Someone left her at the edge of my property. In a sack, Victor. Like garbage." Emerson's eyebrows shot up in feigned surprise. His hand moved to rest on his belt, inches from his holster. It was a casual gesture that Maxwell recognized as anything but. "Any idea who might have done such a thing?" the sheriff asked. "I was hoping you might have some thoughts on that, Sheriff." A beat of silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. The air crackled with unspoken words. "She say anything?" Emerson finally asked. "About where she's been all this time?" "She's not well," Maxwell replied, the understatement bitter on his tongue. "Barely speaking. When she's ready to talk, you'll be the first to know." The lie came easily. Hannah's words echoed in his mind. "Don't trust anyone with a gold watch." It had planted a seed of suspicion that was rapidly growing into a thorny vine. Emerson nodded slowly. "Well, I'm glad she's home safe. The town's been worried about her." He paused, his eyes scanning the property, lingering for a moment on the northern pastures. "Strange timing, though, with the railroad commission coming through next week." "What's that got to do with Hannah?" Maxwell asked, his voice flat. The sheriff shrugged, a picture of innocence. "Nothing, I expect. Just an observation." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll be back in a few days to check on her. Maybe by then she'll be up for answering some questions." Maxwell watched him right away, the uneasy feeling in his gut growing stronger, colder. He turned and went back into the house. He found Hannah still at the window, but now her eyes were following the sheriff's retreating figure. And the look on her face wasn't just fear. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. It confirmed everything he suspected. She knew something about Victor Emerson, something that terrified her. "Hannah," he said gently, his voice barely a whisper. "What happened to you? Where were you?" She turned to him, her face a mask of calm that didn't match the terror screaming in her eyes. "They kept us under the water," she whispered, and the words sent a chill down Maxwell's spine, "where no one could hear us scream." Isaiah Cooper arrived as the sun reached its zenith. He was Maxwell's closest friend, maybe his only friend, and he brought with him a basket of supplies from his general store and the easy, comfortable manner that Maxwell had come to rely on. They'd fought side by side at Gettysburg, had saved each other's lives more times than either cared to count. When Maxwell had decided to head west after the surrender, Isaiah had followed without a second thought. Now he stood in the Sawyer kitchen, his jaw slack and his eyes wide with disbelief as Maxwell explained Hannah's impossible return. "Jesus Christ," Isaiah breathed, sinking into a chair. "And she was just left there? In a sack?" Maxwell nodded, pouring coffee into two chipped mugs. "Like someone wanted me to find her, but didn't want to be seen delivering her." Or like someone wanted to send a message, Isaiah suggested, his sharp mind already working. He accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. How is she? Physically, malnourished, dehydrated, covered in these strange scars. Maxwell's voice caught. But it's her mind I'm worried about, Isaiah. She says things that don't make sense. About people being kept underwater, about not trusting men with gold watches. Isaiah frowned, leaning forward. Gold watches? She specifically said not to trust anyone wearing one. And when I told her Emerson wears one, she reacted. She went silent, but there was recognition there. Fear. Isaiah set his mug down with a sharp click, his expression grim. Maxwell, there's something you should know. The Railroad Commission isn't just coming to survey potential routes. Judge Sullivan's been meeting privately with a group of investors from back east. Word is they found something valuable along the proposed route. Gold, Maxwell said flatly. Isaiah's eyebrows shot up. How'd you know that? Just a hunch. He didn't mention the map Hannah had burned, the one that had nearly cost her her life. Some deep instinct told him to keep that information close, for now. Sullivan's been pushing hard for that railroad, Isaiah continued, buying up land all along the proposed route. He's made offers to just about everyone. Except you, Maxwell pointed out. You're the only holdout. Your land is the most direct path from Blackwater Ridge to Redemption Creek. Maxwell had refused to sell, despite increasingly generous offers. This land was his future, his legacy. It was all he had left to remember his son by. He couldn't part with it. He wouldn't. You think Hannah's disappearance is connected to the railroad? Isaiah asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone in the kitchen. I don't know what to think, Maxwell admitted, running a hand through his hair. But the timing of her return, right before the commission arrives, it can't be a coincidence. Nothing about this feels like a coincidence. A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Hannah stood there. She was barefoot, wearing one of Maxwell's old shirts that hung on her frail frame. Her hair was damp from the bath he'd drawn for her earlier. Her eyes were fixed on Isaiah with a wary recognition. Isaiah Cooper, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, you still make the best apple pie west of the Mississippi. A wide, relieved smile broke across Isaiah's face. Hannah Sawyer. Damn, it's good to see you. He took a step toward her, then stopped, sensing her discomfort, her need for space. And yes, ma'am, I still do. I'll bring you one tomorrow if you'd like. She gave a small nod, the ghost of a smile touching her lips before fading. Then her gaze moved past them, to the window, to the small cemetery visible on the hill. I need to see him, she said quietly. Maxwell and Isaiah exchanged a look heavy with unspoken grief. He knew this moment was coming. He dreaded it. I'll take you, Maxwell said, his own coffee sitting untouched. Isaiah, would you mind? I'll be on my way, his friend assured him, grabbing his hat. Got a store to mind anyway. He looked at Hannah, his voice gentle. Hannah, it's a blessing to have you home. After Isaiah left, Maxwell and Hannah walked slowly toward the cemetery. The silence between them was a living thing. He offered her his arm, but she kept a careful distance, her steps unsteady but determined. The midday sun beat down on them, harsh and unforgiving. The cemetery was small, just a fenced-in plot with 3 graves. Maxwell's parents, taken by influenza years ago, and William, their 7-year-old son, taken by a fever while Hannah was gone. Hannah knelt beside the small headstone, her fingers tracing the carved letters of their son's name. William Maxwell Sawyer. Beloved son, 1871-1878. How? She asked. The single word carried the weight of 3 years of a mother's unanswered prayers. Maxwell knelt beside her, so close but not touching. Fever. Last winter. It came on suddenly. By the time I got the doctor from town, he couldn't finish. The memory was too raw. Hannah bowed her head, but no tears came. Maxwell wondered if she had any left to shed. They spoke of him, she said after a long silence, her voice flat and dead. They used him to torment me, said he was calling for me before he died. A white-hot rage flared in Maxwell's chest. Who? Who told you that, Hannah? She didn't answer directly. Instead, her fingers hovered over the freshly turned earth of the grave. This isn't right, she whispered, a strange look on her face. Something isn't right. Before Maxwell could ask what she meant, she rose to her feet and walked back toward the house, her back straight and rigid. He remained by the grave a moment longer, watching her go, a cold dread creeping into his heart. What did she mean? What wasn't right? What other dark secret was she carrying that kept her separate from him, even now in their shared grief? That evening, as the shadows grew long and painted the land in shades of gray, Maxwell found Hannah in William's room. The room was just as their son had left it. Maxwell hadn't had the heart to change a thing. The small bed with its faded quilt, the wooden toys he'd carved during long winter evenings, the drawing slate where William had practiced his letters. A fine layer of dust covered everything, a testament to the passage of time. Hannah stood in the center of the room, holding one of William's drawings in her hands. It was a crude, childish rendition of a man with exaggerated features. The stick figure wore what looked like dark gloves, and there was a yellow circle drawn at his waist. "He drew this the week before I was taken," she said, her voice hollow, not turning around. "He said he'd seen this man watching our house from the ridge." Maxwell moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the sketch. "Did you see him too?" "No, I thought it was just his imagination." She set the drawing down carefully on the small desk. "I should have listened." She began to straighten the room, her movements mechanical yet purposeful, folding a blanket, aligning a row of books. Maxwell watched, uncertain whether he should help or leave her to this private ritual of grief. "You kept everything," she observed, running a hand over the small bookshelf. "I couldn't bear to change anything," he admitted. Hannah nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Then she turned to face him fully, her expression grim, her eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't seen since her return. "There are others, Maxwell. Other women. Other children." "What do you mean? Where?" "The water camp," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's near Blackwater Ridge. They keep them in the old Wilcox mine, the one that flooded years ago." Maxwell remembered the accident. 3 men had died when groundwater had burst through the shaft walls. The mine had been abandoned, deemed too dangerous to salvage. It was the perfect place to hide something. Or someone. "Who's keeping them there?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Why?" Hannah's eyes clouded with a terrible memory. "Men who work for the railroad, for Judge Sullivan. Though I don't think he knows everything they do in his name." She gripped Maxwell's arm suddenly, her fingers digging into his flesh with surprising strength. "They take people whose land they want, people who won't sell. They took me because I found their map, the secret route for the railroad. It runs right through our land, Maxwell, right where they found the gold." The pieces began to fall into place, forming a dark and ugly picture. The repeated, generous offers for his land, Hannah's sudden disappearance, the map she'd burned. It all made a horrible kind of sense. Then a new, more terrible thought struck him. "William," he asked, his voice tight, strangled, Did they take him too?" Hannah's face crumpled, the careful mask of control finally breaking. "I don't know," she sobbed, the sound tearing through the quiet room. "I heard things, rumors among the guards about children being taken when their parents wouldn't cooperate. But I never saw him. I prayed every day that he was still with you, that he was safe." Maxwell pulled her into his arms, and this time she didn't resist. She sagged against him, so small, so fragile. But there was steel in her too. He could feel it in the set of her shoulders, the way she fought to control her breathing. "We need to tell someone," he said, his mind racing. "The territorial marshal." "No!" Hannah pulled back, panic flaring in her eyes. "We can't trust the law here. Sheriff Emerson is part of it. He's the one who identified me to them. He told them I'd seen the map." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath Maxwell. Victor Emerson, a man he'd known for nearly a decade, a man he'd shared drinks with. The idea that he could be involved in something so monstrous was almost impossible to grasp. "The gold watch," Maxwell remembered aloud. "That's what you meant." Hannah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "All of them wear one. The inner circle. The ones who know about the gold. The ones who know about the water camp." Outside, the last light of day faded completely. leaving them in the gathering darkness of their son's empty room. Maxwell lit a lamp, its warm glow creating a fragile illusion of comfort in a world that had suddenly become more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Tomorrow, he decided, his voice hard as iron, I'll ride to Blackwater Ridge. I'll see this mine for myself. No, Hannah said firmly. They'll kill you. They have guards, dogs. You wouldn't get within 100 yards. Then what do you suggest we do, Hannah? We can't just leave those people there to rot. Hannah looked around the room at the remnants of their son's short life. Her expression hardened, grief transmuting into cold, hard resolve. We need proof first, something solid, something even a man like Judge Sullivan can't ignore or deny. Her eyes met his. And then, we'll need help. Isaiah, Maxwell suggested immediately. We can trust him. Hannah nodded slowly. And there's someone else, a man named Harrison Blackwood. He worked for the railroad as an engineer, but he was asking too many questions, getting too close to the truth. The last I heard, they were hunting him. How do we find a man who's being hunted? I don't know, she admitted, but he's our best hope. He knows their plans. He knows their weaknesses. Maxwell took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away this time. Her skin was cold, despite the warmth of the room. Hannah, he said softly, why did they let you go? After 3 years, why now? Her expression darkened, and a chill went through him. They didn't let me go, Maxwell, she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. I escaped. She squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. And they'll be coming for me. They'll be coming for us. We don't have much time. The lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. In that moment, Maxwell saw not just the broken woman who had returned to him, but glimpses of the fierce, determined Hannah he'd married, the woman who would protect what she loved, no matter the cost. Then we'll be ready, he promised. He had no idea how they could possibly prepare for the storm that was about to break over their heads. But he knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. Margaret Wilson had never considered herself a gossip. She preferred the term information curator. As the widow of a Confederate captain and the mother of a son who never returned from Gettysburg, she felt entitled to know the business of Redemption Creek. Knowledge, she had learned, was its own form of power in a world that had taken everything else from her. The news of Hannah Sawyer's return had reached her before noon, a ripple spreading through the town's intricate social web. By evening, Margaret had pieced together the basic facts. Hannah, found alive, delivered under mysterious circumstances, in poor health but recovering. What the gossip chain couldn't tell her was why. Why now? After 3 years? The timing, with the all-important Railroad Commission arriving next week, struck her as deeply suspect. It felt like a calculated move in a game Margaret didn't fully understand. She locked the door to her dress shop for the evening and headed for home, her path taking her past the sheriff's office. A light still spilled from the windows, despite the late hour. On impulse, she paused, pretending to adjust her shawl against the evening chill. Through the window, she could see Sheriff Emerson in a heated conversation with Judge Sullivan. The judge's face was flushed with anger, his hands gesturing emphatically. Emerson stood with his back to the window, but his posture radiated tension. Margaret moved closer, feigning interest in the flower arrangement outside the neighboring bakery. Fragments of their conversation drifted through the partially open window. Complicates everything, the judge was saying. If she talks, she won't. Emerson cut in, his voice a low growl. She's in no condition. You don't know what she might have told Sawyer already. I'll handle Sawyer. Margaret's pulse quickened. They were talking about Hannah. But why would Hannah Sawyer's return concern the most powerful men in town? What could she possibly know? The door to the sheriff's office suddenly swung open, and Margaret busied herself with the flowers, her head bowed. The distinctive sound of the judge's expensive silver-tipped boots clicked on the boardwalk. Mrs. Wilson, he said, his voice smooth as silk, forcing her to look up. Rather late for gardening, isn't it? Judge Edward Sullivan was a handsome man in his 50s, with silver threading his dark hair and the confident bearing of old money. He'd moved to Redemption Creek 5 years ago, bringing with him powerful connections and grand plans for the town's future. Just tidying Mrs. Hammond's display, Margaret replied smoothly, not missing a beat. She does let things get so untidy. The judge smiled, a cold practice thing. Always looking after our little community. We appreciate your dedication. Sheriff Emerson appeared in the doorway behind him, his expression shifting to practice neutrality when he spotted her. Evening, Mrs. Wilson, he said with a tip of his hat. Can I escort you home? It's getting dark. Thank you, Sheriff, but I know my way, she replied, her tone polite but firm. Good evening, gentlemen. As she walked away, Margaret could feel their eyes on her back. Their conversation had unsettled her deeply. Judge Sullivan had been instrumental in helping her secure the loan for her dress shop. She'd always found him to be a perfect gentleman, but there had been something in his voice just now, an edge of desperation she'd never heard before. She changed her route, turning toward the small church that served as the heart of the town. She needed to talk to someone disconnected from the town's politics. She needed to speak with Reverend Hart. The church door was unlocked, as always. A light spilled from beneath the door to the Reverend's study. She knocked softly. Come in, called the gentle voice. Margaret entered to find the elderly pastor surrounded by books, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. Mrs. Wilson, this is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion, Reverend. She hesitated, suddenly unsure of herself. I needed guidance. The Reverend gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. Is this about the news from the Sawyer Ranch? Margaret sank into the chair. Yes, partly. I overheard something concerning just now, a conversation between Judge Sullivan and Sheriff Emerson. They seemed afraid of what Hannah Sawyer might say. Reverend Hart removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. Mrs. Wilson, may I ask why Hannah Sawyer's fate concerns you so deeply? If memory serves, you were among those who spoke most critically of her after she disappeared. Margaret flushed. It was true. She had been vocal in her belief that Hannah had abandoned her family. The idea that a mother could leave her sick child had been so abhorrent to her that she'd needed to vilify Hannah to make sense of it. I may have been wrong about her, she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. If she was taken against her will, the Reverend said gently, if she's been suffering all this time while we've been judging her, then we have all sinned against her. He sighed. What is it you're asking of me, Mrs. Wilson? I don't know, she confessed. Then her posture straightened. Perhaps I'm asking if you would accompany me to the Sawyer Ranch tomorrow, to offer our support, and to see for ourselves what Hannah's return might truly mean. The Reverend considered this for a long moment, then nodded. I think that would be appropriate, though I suspect Maxwell Sawyer may not welcome visitors. Then we'll bring offerings he can't refuse, Margaret decided, a new sense of purpose filling her. For the first time in years, Margaret felt like she had a role to play beyond just surviving. If Hannah Sawyer had been wronged, not just by her captors but by the town's judgment, then Margaret would be the first to help make amends. And if there was something more sinister at play, something involving the judge and the sheriff, then Margaret Wilson was going to find out what it was. She had lost too much to the ambitions of powerful men during the war. She would not stand by silently while it happened again. The moon hung low over Redemption Creek, casting a silver light across the sleeping town. But not everyone was sleeping. In the back room of Isaiah Cooper's general store, a lamp still burned, its light falling on three figures hunched over a crude map spread across a table. Blackwater Ridge is here, Isaiah said, pointing to a jagged line drawn in charcoal. The old Wilcox mine would be about here, near the north face where the spring feeds in. Maxwell studied the map, his memory filling in the details. It's isolated, miles from any trail, the perfect place to hide people. The third figure, a thin man with watchful eyes and a scholar's ink-stained fingers, traced a path from the ridge to Redemption Creek. The railroad survey marked this as the primary route, he said, his voice soft but precise. Cutting straight through your land, Mr. Sawyer. Harrison Blackwood, the former railroad engineer, had arrived just after midnight, a ghost slipping into town. He'd been living in the shadows for months, a man on the run, gathering evidence against his former employers. The gold deposit sits right here, Blackwood continued, circling an area that encompassed most of the northern corner of Maxwell's ranch. Not a massive vein, but rich enough to justify their interest. Judge Sullivan has been buying up land all along the route, but yours is the linchpin. And when I wouldn't sell, Maxwell began. They took your wife, Blackwood finished grimly. It's their pattern. They've done it at least 7 other times that I know of. They take a family member, usually a wife or a child. They apply pressure. Most men break within a few weeks. Hannah held out for 3 years, Isaiah said, a note of awe in his voice. Blackwood nodded. She's exceptional. Most of their captives. He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Die, Maxwell said flatly. You can say it. Yes, Blackwood confirmed. From mistreatment, disease, or their own hand. The conditions in the water camp are inhuman. Maxwell's fingers curled into tight fists on the table. And these other captives, they're still there? Right now. As of 3 days ago, yes. 4 women, 3 children. Maybe more by now. Then we need to get them out. Tonight. Blackwood shook his head. It's not that simple. The camp is heavily guarded. Dogs, armed men. We'd need a proper force, and we have no idea who we can trust. The corruption runs deep. The gold watches go deep. So we do what? Leave them there to suffer? Maxwell demanded, his voice rising. No, Blackwood said firmly, but we need to be smart. We need irrefutable evidence, something that will force the territorial marshal to intervene. Without that, it's our word against Judge Sullivan's, and he's a powerful man with powerful friends. Isaiah placed a calming hand on Maxwell's shoulder. Harrison's right. We need a solid case, and we need to keep Hannah safe. If they find out she's talking, I won't let them touch her again, Maxwell vowed, his voice low and dangerous. Not while I'm breathing. Blackwood studied him with a measuring gaze. They'll come for her. For both of you. You know that, right? Let them try. As they prepared to part ways, slipping back into the night, Maxwell pulled Blackwood aside. There's something else. My son, William. The engineer's expression softened. I heard about your loss. I'm sorry. Hannah said something strange at his grave, that something wasn't right. Maxwell hesitated, the question almost too terrible to voice. Is there any chance, any possibility that he might have been taken? That his death was staged? Blackwood's face revealed nothing. I never saw a boy matching his description at the camp, but that doesn't mean... He sighed. I have a contact, someone on the inside. I can ask her. She might know something. A flicker of hope, dangerous and fragile, sparked in Maxwell's chest. He just nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in his throat. As he rode back to the ranch under the pale moonlight, Maxwell felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. Hannah's return should have been a miracle. Instead, it had ripped back the curtain on a darkness that ran deep beneath the surface of Redemption Creek. A darkness that had stolen 3 years of his wife's life, and had possibly stolen much, much more. If there was even the slightest chance that William was alive, that his son had been taken instead of being claimed by a fever, Maxwell would tear heaven and earth apart to find him, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The next morning, 2 riders approached the Sawyer Ranch. Maxwell recognized them as they drew closer. Reverend Hart and, surprisingly, Margaret Wilson. The Reverend and Mrs. Wilson, he said to Hannah, who stood watching from the porch. They're not exactly regular visitors. Hannah's grip tightened on the coffee mug she was holding. Do you trust them? The Reverend, yes, Maxwell said. Mrs. Wilson. She was hard on you after you disappeared, had strong opinions about a mother who would abandon her child. A flicker of pain crossed Hannah's face. She wasn't the only one, I imagine. They met their visitors at the hitching post. Margaret Wilson stood stiffly, a large basket hooked over her arm, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Hannah's frail appearance. We've brought some provisions, Margaret said, her voice a little shaky. Bread, preserves, and, she hesitated, then pulled a carefully folded bundle of blue fabric from the basket. I took the liberty of altering one of my patterns. I thought perhaps you might need a new dress. Thank you, Hannah said quietly, touching the material. That's very kind. An awkward silence settled over the group. Mrs. Sawyer, Hannah. Margaret suddenly plunged ahead. I owe you an apology. I spoke unkindly of you. I assumed that I abandoned my son. Hannah finished for her voice devoid of accusation. Margaret flushed but nodded. It was wrong of me. Uncharitable and unchristian. You weren't the only one who thought it, Hannah said. It would have been the simpler explanation. Maxwell watched this exchange in surprise. He'd never known Margaret Wilson to be a woman who easily admitted error. Something had changed. Why are you really here? Maxwell asked, his tone direct. Margaret exchanged a glance with the Reverend, then met Maxwell's gaze. Because something is wrong in this town. Last night I overheard Judge Sullivan and Sheriff Emerson. They were talking about Hannah's return. They were worried, unhappy. Hannah and Maxwell exchanged a look. A silent communication passed between them. How much should they reveal? I'm not one to spread gossip, Mr. Sawyer, Margaret continued, but I believe something wicked is happening here. Something connected to the railroad, to the judge, and to what happened to your wife. She took a deep breath. I've seen what the ambitions of powerful men can cost. I lost my husband and my son to such ambitions during the war. If similar forces are at work in Redemption Creek, I will not remain silent. Associating with us might become dangerous, Maxwell warned. I wasn't lost for 3 years, Reverend, Hannah said, her voice clear and strong. I was taken, held captive, along with other women and children whose families wouldn't cooperate with certain plans for this region. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Dear God! Reverend Hart's face had gone pale. Who is behind this atrocity? We have our suspicions, Maxwell said carefully, but not enough proof. The gold watches, Hannah murmured, almost to herself. What was that, dear? Margaret asked. Hannah looked up, and something fierce and dangerous flashed in her eyes. Nothing. Just be careful who you trust in town. Not everyone is what they seem. After their visitors had departed, Maxwell found Hannah in their bedroom, holding the blue dress Margaret had brought against her thin frame. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. Do you think we can trust them? He asked from the doorway. Hannah set the dress aside. The Reverend, yes. Mrs. Wilson. There's genuine regret there, and anger at being deceived. Those are powerful motivators. She could be an ally. She turned to face him. We need allies, Maxwell. She moved to the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm going to ride into town tomorrow. Hannah, that's too dangerous. If Emerson sees you, he needs to see me, she interrupted, a new determination in her voice. They all do. I will not hide in the shadows, like I have something to hide. Let them see me walking freely. Let them wonder what I know, and who I've told. It was a calculated risk, a direct challenge. Maxwell recognized the strategy. It was what a general did when he was outnumbered, but unwilling to surrender the field. I'll go with you, he said. Hannah shook her head. No, you need to meet with Blackwood. Find out what his contact knows, about the camp, and about William. The mention of their son's name was a physical blow. The hope that he might be alive was a constant, agonizing ache in his chest. I don't want you in town alone, he insisted. She offered a thin, determined smile. I won't be alone. I'll have Isaiah with me, Maxwell finally conceded. He knew better than to argue with her when she had that look in her eye. The look of a woman who had been to hell and back and had no fear left for mortal men. Be careful, he said. Hannah's expression hardened. They should be careful of me. The next day, when Hannah Sawyer walked into Isaiah Cooper's general store, a hush fell over the room. Every head turned to stare. She wore the blue dress Margaret Wilson had made. Her hair was neatly braided. Her back was straight, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Though still painfully thin, she carried herself with a dignity that commanded a strange sort of respect. Isaiah moved quickly to her side, breaking the spell. Mrs. Sawyer, he greeted her warmly, his voice booming through the quiet store. What a pleasure. How may I help you today? Conversations resumed in hushed tones as Hannah moved to the back of the store with Isaiah. Maxwell sent word you were coming, Isaiah murmured as she pretended to examine spools of thread. Are you sure this is wise? Necessary, not wise, she replied. I need to be seen. Isaiah nodded, his expression grim. Blackwood returned last night. His news isn't good. The guards at the water camp have doubled since your escape. Hannah's hand stilled. Has anyone else gotten out? No, but he did confirm something. Isaiah glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. There is a boy there. He matches William's description, about 8 years old, dark hair, with a small scar above his right eye. The spool of thread slipped from Hannah's fingers, clattering to the floor. Her face went ashen. William, she whispered, her legs suddenly weak. He's alive. Isaiah steadied her with a hand on her arm. Blackwood couldn't confirm it's him for certain, Hannah, but the description... It's him, Hannah said with absolute certainty. She remembered his fall from the apple tree, the cut that had left that tiny pale scar. I knew it. At his grave, I felt it. Maxwell buried an empty coffin, didn't he? He was told William died of fever while you were gone, Isaiah said gently. Sheriff Emerson handled the burial personally, said the disease made it unsafe for Maxwell to view the body. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of monstrous cruelty. Anger, fierce and hot, flashed across Hannah's face, quickly replaced by a cold resolve. We need to get to that camp, now. Hannah, we can't just... The bell above the shop door jingled cheerfully, cutting him off. Sheriff Victor Emerson stepped inside. His gaze swept the store, coming to rest on Hannah and Isaiah at the back. A thin, cold smile spread across his face as he approached. Mrs. Sawyer, he called out, his voice carrying across the now silent store. What a miracle to see you up and about. The whole town's been buzzing about your return. Hannah turned to face him, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. Sheriff Emerson, you're looking well. Emerson stopped before them, his gold watch chain glinting in the light. Better than you, I'd wager, though you're certainly improving. Must be good to be home. Very good, she agreed, though I find much has changed in Redemption Creek. Progress waits for no one, Mrs. Sawyer, he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. I've been meaning to come by the ranch, ask you a few questions about where you've been. Have you? Hannah's voice was cool as ice. I would think a man of your position would have more pressing matters to attend to. A flicker of annoyance crossed the sheriff's face. A woman missing for 3 years suddenly reappears. That raises questions that need answering. I'm sure it does, Hannah said, her movements deliberately calm as she picked up another spool of thread. Perhaps you should speak with the men who took me. I believe you know them quite well. The sheriff's smile vanished completely. That sounds like an accusation, Mrs. Sawyer. Does it? She met his gaze directly, her own eyes burning holes in his. How interesting. Isaiah stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between them. Hannah was just collecting some sewing supplies, Victor. Nothing that warrants an interrogation in my store. Emerson's eyes never left Hannah's face. Of course, just being neighborly. He replaced his hat. I'll be seeing you both soon, I expect. Mrs. Sawyer, give my regards to your husband. After the sheriff departed, the tension in the store slowly began to dissipate. That was dangerous, Isaiah murmured, wrapping Hannah's purchases. It was necessary, she countered. He needed to know that I'm not afraid of him. Are you not afraid? Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the package. Terrified, she admitted, but fear kept me alive for 3 years. I know how to use it now. I won't let it use me. As she prepared to leave, Isaiah noticed a man watching from across the street, tall and lean, wearing dark gloves despite the warm day. He stood in the shadow of the saloon, his gaze fixed on the general store. Hannah, Isaiah said quietly, when you leave, turn right, walk past the saloon. There's someone you should see. She followed his instructions without question. As she passed the saloon, the man stepped out of the shadows, removing his hat. Hannah faltered mid-step, recognition flashing across her face. It was Harrison Blackwood. Mrs. Sawyer, Blackwood said, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Railroad surveyor, I understand you have some concerns about the proposed route through your property. Hannah recovered instantly, understanding the pretense. Indeed, Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you could clarify a few points for me. It would be my pleasure. Shall we? He offered his arm. To any observer, they were just a railroad man and a landowner discussing business. But as they walked toward the end of the street, their conversation took a very different turn. Your son is alive, Blackwood said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. I've seen him with my own eyes. He's at the water camp, and he's not the only one. Judge Sullivan's daughter is there too. Hannah's world tilted on its axis. Sullivan's daughter? The judge is part of this? And they took his own child? He doesn't know, Blackwood explained quickly. Rebecca Sullivan disappeared 5 years ago. The official story is that she ran away. Sullivan has been moving heaven and earth to bring the railroad here because he thinks progress and prosperity will somehow bring her back. He has no idea she's been a prisoner in his own backyard. They reached the church, where Reverend Hart was tending a small garden. He nodded to them in greeting but kept his distance, sensing their need for privacy. How do we get them out? Hannah asked, her voice tight with a storm of emotions. We're working on a plan, but first we need to expose what's happening, and we're going to use the judge to do it. Blackwood's eyes were grim. I have a contact inside the camp, a woman named Ellis. She works in their infirmary. She says William, he's alive, Mrs. Sawyer, but he doesn't speak. He hasn't said a word since he arrived. The trauma, the horror of what her son must have endured stole her breath. But he's alive, she whispered, the words a desperate prayer. He's alive, and I'm going to bring him home. As they parted ways, Blackwood pressed a small, heavy object into her hand, a gold watch, its surface scratched and tarnished. Took this from one of the guards, he explained. It might prove useful. Hannah slipped it into her pocket, a token of the enemy and a potential key to their downfall. She had walked into town as a victim. She walked away as a soldier, armed with the truth and ready for war. The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke over Redemption Creek. Sheets of rain washed the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a town on edge. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, Judge Edward Sullivan stared into his fourth glass of whiskey. The Railroad Commission was arriving tomorrow. It should have been his moment of triumph. Instead, his carefully laid plans were unraveling. Hannah Sawyer's return had stirred up things he'd thought long buried. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of rain-scented air and Sheriff Victor Emerson. Judge, Emerson greeted him, his voice carefully neutral. Didn't expect to find you here. Perhaps I'm drowning my concerns, Sullivan replied, his words slurred slightly. Concerns that our operation is falling apart, that you've been keeping secrets from me, Victor. Emerson signaled the bartender for a drink. Everything is under control. Is it? Sullivan turned on him, his eyes suddenly sharp. I'm hearing whispers about the water camp, the camp I specifically instructed you to shut down months ago. The camp serves a purpose, Emerson said coolly. It ensures cooperation. Cooperation? Sullivan spat the word. I authorize pressure, Victor, not a permanent prison, and I never ever authorized taking children. A tense silence fell between them. Is this about the Sawyer boy? Emerson asked. I told you, the child died of fever. It was unfortunate. And if I were to discover otherwise? Sullivan hissed. If I were to learn you've been lying to me? Then I'd remind you, Judge, Emerson said softly, a clear threat in his voice, that your hands aren't exactly clean. Your signature is on documents that would be very difficult to explain. Your financial stake ties you to every single decision that's been made, whether you personally authorized it or not. The threat hung between them, a declaration of war. The commission arrives tomorrow, Sullivan said finally, backing down. After the railroad deal is finalized, we will address these other matters. Of course, Judge, Emerson said, his smile cold. One more thing, Victor, Sullivan added as he stood to leave. If I discover you have lied to me about any children being held at that camp, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Are we clear? Crystal, Emerson replied. From the shadows of a doorway across the street, Harrison Blackwood watched the judge storm out into the rain. The fracture between the two most powerful men in town was widening. Soon it would be deep enough to break them both. 3 days until the commission arrived had been the plan, but now Blackwood had a feeling they didn't have that long. Emerson was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were dangerously unpredictable. The clock was ticking. The next morning, the rain had softened to a persistent drizzle. In the back room of Isaiah's store, a new, more urgent plan was being formed. "We have a problem," Blackwood announced the moment he slipped through the door. He was soaked, his face grim. "Emerson and Sullivan have had a falling out. My contact at the saloon overheard Emerson giving instructions to one of his deputies late last night. Something about clearing out the operation if things go wrong today. I think he's planning to eliminate all the witnesses." Hannah's blood ran cold. "William, we have to move now," she said, her voice shaking with urgency. "Not this afternoon? Now." "Agreed," Blackwood said, "but we need to warn Maxwell. He's at the ranch expecting us at the rendezvous point 6 hours from now." "I'll go," Isaiah offered. "No," Hannah countered. "You're needed here to coordinate with Margaret and the Reverend. I'll go to Maxwell. The whole town will be focused on the commission's train arriving at noon. No one will see me leave." "And if you're caught?" Isaiah asked softly. Hannah's expression hardened into something unbreakable. "Then I'll have failed my son twice. But I won't let that happen." Isaiah pressed a small revolver into her hand. "Just in case." Hannah tucked it into her pocket without a word. There had been a time when the weight of a gun would have felt foreign and wrong in her hand. But that Hannah had died in the water camp, drowned beneath the weight of survival. The woman who slipped out the back door, mounting a horse with practiced ease despite 3 years without riding, was a different creature altogether. Tempered by suffering, hardened by loss, and driven by a mother's love so fierce it could move mountains or tear them down. As she galloped out of town, the rain plastering her hair to her face, Hannah whispered a promise that was carried away on the wind. "Hold on, William. Mama's coming." She found Maxwell at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, the same ritual he'd followed before battle during the war. He saw her coming, a lone rider pushing her horse hard through the mud. "What's happened?" he asked, rushing out to meet her. "Plans have changed," she gasped, dismounting on shaky legs. "Emerson's going to kill the prisoners. Today." Within the hour they were mounted and riding hard toward Blackwater Ridge, leaving the ranch behind without a backward glance. The rain provided cover, washing away their tracks, shielding them from prying eyes. They moved as one, a husband and wife united in a single desperate purpose. They would not get their old lives back. That life had been shattered beyond repair. But if they survived the day, they would get their son back. They would be a family again, and they would build something new from the broken pieces. First, though, they had to walk through the gates of hell one more time. At precisely noon, the train carrying the Railroad Commission pulled into Redemption Creek. A welcoming party led by a smiling Judge Sullivan and a watchful Sheriff Emerson was there to greet them. Neither man noticed Harrison Blackwood slipping through the crowd and depositing a sealed envelope with the hotel clerk. An envelope addressed to Judge Sullivan, marked urgent. Regarding Rebecca Sullivan. From the window of her dress shop, Margaret Wilson observed the scene, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The tension between the judge and the sheriff was a palpable thing. Beside her, Reverend Hart shifted nervously. "Are you certain this is wise, Margaret?" he murmured. "Some risks are worth taking, Reverend," she replied. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Inside the hotel dining room, Judge Sullivan was hosting a luncheon for the commissioners. He was mid-sentence when the clerk discreetly placed the envelope beside his plate. Seeing his daughter's name, he excused himself and found a private reading room. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside was a map of the Wilcox mine, labeled the water camp, and a list of names, current captives, among them circled in red ink. Rebecca Sullivan, age 16, captive 5 years. Beneath the map, a simple note. "Your daughter lives, Judge. Emerson has lied to you for years. Go to the mine. See for yourself. But hurry. Emerson plans to eliminate all witnesses today." The paper crumpled in Sullivan's fist. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over him. Rebecca, alive, a prisoner. He stormed out of the reading room and nearly collided with Margaret and the Reverend. "Judge Sullivan," Margaret greeted him with feigned surprise, "you look pale." "What do you know about the Wilcox mine, Mrs. Wilson?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Only what Hannah Sawyer has shared," Margaret said, her voice steady, "about the women and children held prisoner there, including, I believe, your daughter." The confirmation hit Sullivan like a physical blow. You're working with the Sawyers. We're working for justice, Margaret corrected. As I hope you are now, Judge. A bitter laugh escaped Sullivan's lips. Yes, there will be justice today. His decision was made. I'm going to the mine, now. Then you'll need allies, Margaret said. The Sawyers and others are already on their way. Reverend, Sullivan commanded, his voice sharp. Keep Emerson occupied here, by any means necessary. To Margaret he said, I'm going with you. Meet me at the livery in 10 minutes. Bring medical supplies. His ambition had blinded him, had created the conditions for this evil to flourish under his very nose. There would be a reckoning. For Emerson, for Decker, for all of them, and for Edward Sullivan himself. He would get his daughter back, or he would die trying. From a ridge overlooking Blackwater Canyon, Maxwell and Hannah watched the two guards at the mine entrance. They had arrived ahead of schedule, their desperation giving them speed. Then more riders appeared through the mist. It was Isaiah, accompanied not by Blackwood, but by Margaret Wilson and a grim-faced Judge Sullivan. What is this? Maxwell demanded, his rifle leveled. They're here to help, Isaiah said quickly. Hannah emerged from the rocks, her revolver trained steadily on the judge. Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you where you stand. Sullivan met her gaze without flinching. Because my daughter is in there too, Mrs. Sawyer. Emerson lied to me. After a long, tense moment, Hannah lowered her weapon. If this is a trap, I will kill you myself. Do you understand? Perfectly, Sullivan replied. They formed a hasty plan. Isaiah would create a diversion, a small fire to draw the guards away. The rest of them would go in. Decker, Sullivan asked, the man who runs this place. He's mine, Hannah said, the cold certainty in her voice chilling them all. Minutes later, smoke began to rise from the eastern slope. The guards conferred, then headed toward the fire, leaving the entrance unguarded. Now, Maxwell whispered. Move fast. Stay low. They descended the ridge and slipped into the mine. The air was heavy with the stench of despair. The familiar smell triggered a wave of terror in Hannah, but Maxwell's hand on her shoulder anchored her to the present. The women are in the main processing chamber, she whispered. The children are beyond that. They moved deeper, surprising and subduing two guards in the tunnel. As they neared the main chamber, they heard a man's cruel voice, then the sharp crack of a slap, followed by a woman's defiant cry. You'll be moved tonight, a man with a heavy southern drawl was saying. Those who cooperate will be treated well. Those who don't... It was Decker. Maxwell didn't wait. He stepped into the chamber, rifle raised. That's no way to treat a lady, Decker. Three armed men faced him, the captive women cowering against the far wall. Maxwell Sawyer, Decker drawled, a cruel smile on his face. I've been expecting you. You seem to be outnumbered. He's not alone, Hannah said, appearing at Maxwell's side, her revolver aimed at Decker's heart. Decker's smile faltered. Mrs. Sawyer, I was told you'd been taken care of. I'm harder to kill than you expected, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Now where is my son? The standoff was broken when Sullivan stepped into the chamber. Decker's eyes widened in shock. Judge Sullivan! Where is my daughter, Decker? Sullivan demanded, his own weapon drawn. Understanding dawned on Decker's face, followed by a malicious grin. Ah, so that's how it is. Emerson said you were becoming a problem. The tension snapped. One of the captive women, a brave soul named Ellis, pointed to a tunnel at the far end of the chamber. The children are through there. A boy and two girls. The distraction was all Maxwell needed. He lunged, smashing the butt of his rifle into Decker's jaw. Decker staggered but didn't fall, reaching for his own weapon. Hannah fired. The bullet struck Decker's shoulder, spinning him around. Sullivan shot one of the other guards. The third threw down his weapon and surrendered. The fight was over in seconds, but Hannah barely registered it. Her attention was fixed on the tunnel Ellis had pointed to, the tunnel that led to William. She moved toward it, drawn by a force more powerful than fear. Hannah, wait! Maxwell called, but she was already gone. The passage opened into a smaller, dimly lit chamber. Three small figures huddled on a straw pallet in the corner. Two girls and a boy. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. He was older, thinner, his eyes haunted and empty. But it was him. "William," she whispered, the revolver falling from her nerveless fingers. "William, it's Mama. I've come to take you home." The boy stared at her. No recognition in his eyes, just the ingrained caution of a child who knew only pain. The older girl, Rebecca Sullivan, stood protectively in front of him. "It's all right," Hannah said gently, dropping to her knees. "I'm not going to hurt you. Your father is here too, Rebecca." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the small wooden horse Maxwell had carved years ago. "Do you remember this, William? Papa made it for you." She held it out. After a long moment, the boy's small hand reached out and closed around the familiar toy. Maxwell and Sullivan entered the chamber. At the sight of his father, William flinched, but then something shifted in his gaze. "Rebecca," Sullivan choked out, his composure finally breaking. "Father," the girl whispered, a storm of emotions on her young face. As father and daughter were reunited, Hannah held out her hand to her son. He watched her for a moment, then his small fingers curled around hers. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. But it was enough. It was a beginning. Maxwell knelt beside them, his hand covering both of theirs. A family, shattered and broken, was finally being pieced back together. Step by step, they led the children out of the darkness and toward the light. William paused at the entrance to the mine, looking back at the prison that had held him for so long. Then he turned his face toward the sunlight and the open sky, his grip on his mother's hand tightening. He still hadn't spoken a word, but in that small, determined gesture, Hannah heard everything she needed to. Forward, home, together. The reckoning in Redemption Creek was just beginning. Emerson and the rest of Sullivan's conspirators would face justice. The town would be forced to confront the darkness it had ignored for so long. The scars, both visible and invisible, would take years to heal. But as Hannah Sawyer walked out of that mine, hand in hand with her husband and her son, she knew they would face it all together. They had survived the water. They would survive the fire to come. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the unforgiving frontier, and you want to hear more tales about the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next, and let me know in the comments below what part of this story hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe out there.